Hello, and welcome back. Earlier this week, I had a great conversation with Adam Hunte, who's a top leader out of Minneapolis. I love this guy's background. Comes from an immigrant family from Ethiopia, and all your motivation, everything that you do, you have a very strong why. You want to give back to your family. You recognize how much your family sacrificed for you. You want to make their lives amazing. So you've got a very strong why, and I like that. You've really got the heart of a servant leader, and I always gravitate to people like that. So pleasure speaking with you, Adam. And you asked a very thought-provoking question. The question is this: how do we discover our weaknesses? Now, the first thing I thought of when I heard that, like weaknesses, how are our weaknesses? How do they bubble up to the surface? And sometimes we don't discover. Sometimes we get some major blind spots. But the first thing I thought of is a quote from Norman Vincent Peale on criticism. And his quote is this: "The trouble with most of us is that we would rather be ruined by praise than saved by criticism." You think about that, ruined by praise. We gravitate to approval. We gravitate to hearing good things. Whereas criticism might be what we need to hear. Criticism would save us, is what Norman Vincent Peale said. And I think that's such a true statement. Now, let's just unpack this a little bit. Okay, so why do we avoid criticism? Well, we avoid criticism because it doesn't feel good. It's negative. I don't want to be criticized. I don't want to be judged by others. I don't want to be looked down upon. So we tend to just simply avoid criticism, and I get it. Now just think about this for a second. This is Tony Robbins 101, and we could have a whole episode just on this. But Tony says, and this is one of the first things you'll learn as a student of Tony Robbins, is the two human motivations. Everything we do is one of two reasons: to either gain pleasure or to avoid pain. So everything we do is tied to those two elements. What can I do to gain pleasure? What can I do to avoid pain? And so you think about this. Sometimes we can get to a point where there's so much pain in our lives that it may be time to seek criticism, because criticism, the pain of criticism, might be less of a stinger than the pain of reality. Like, that's when I've discovered that I actually gravitate to criticism, is when I don't like the position I'm in. I don't like what's happening. So therefore, I may want to seek some healthy criticism. Now, that may sound like an oxymoron, like healthy criticism. I mean, we avoid criticism. Like, healthy criticism, I'm not so sure about that. Analogy that I use is, let's say that you're driving an automobile and you have a burned out taillight. How do you discover that you've got a burned out taillight? Well, the answer, I think most of us would think like, oh yeah, when a police officer pulls me over. Yep, that's one way to discover you got a burned out taillight. Police officer pulls you over. Here's a fix-it ticket. You got to go get this thing fixed within 30 days. At least that's my memory. And then you got to prove that you did it. You got to go to the court. I mean, it's a pain to deal with that, to fix a ticket. Or even worse yet, you find out after getting into an accident that you had a burned out taillight. So that's painful. I'd rather one of my neighbors tell me as they see me pull into my garage, "Hey, by the way, Jamie, we saw, you've got a burned out taillight." I'm like, "Oh, gee, thank you so much." I'd rather hear that from you than getting into an accident or having a police officer tell me. I mean, that's healthy criticism. I can think of a couple examples in my life of like really healthy criticism. I think we can all relate to the pain that comes from being a field rep. Especially when you're living in Groundhog's Day and it's just day after day after day, rejection after rejection after rejection. I mean, the field can certainly weigh on you. And there was pain. There was pain. I felt stuck. I wasn't moving up. So I sought the owner's counsel. I wanted to be the last person at the end of the week. End of the week for me was Saturday, close of business. I made sure everybody else was gone, everybody else left. It was just me one-on-one with the owner, and asked the loaded question: from your perspective, from your chair, okay, you're in the position I want to be in. What do you think I need to work on? And so then I had the weekend. I had Saturday night, Sunday really reflect and things like that. So I wanted to hear it at that time so I could really marinate on this and come up with a plan. And it was hard to hear a lot of the things. It's like, well, Jamie, you're not spending enough time with your people, or you're not building the right relationship with your people, or you're not setting the pace, you're not a great example for them. And so I'm hearing this kind of stuff, but diligently, week after week, Saturday, close of business, I'm writing down, what does the owner believe that I need to work on? And so I'm hearing this stuff. And so, you're on the right track when? Towards the end of my field journey. I remember this distinctly, and it just put a big smile on my face. I'm like, hey, so what do you think I got to work on? Well, Jamie, your ties are a little too wild. You need to dress a little more conservatively, like maybe some stripes or something like that, or a solid tie. And I'm like, really? I'm like, that's what you have for me? My Mickey Mouse ties or Disney ties or whatever the wildness is in my ties, that's the only thing you got for me, is that I got to work on that. I'm like, yep. You're on the right track. Okay, so that's just one example of like good, healthy criticism in my life. And this one was a little more recent and maybe tough to share. I'm not sure, but years ago, kind of again, just I want to be a well-rounded person. I want to win at every aspect of my life that's important to me: family, business, philanthropy, list goes on. And so I hired a professional coach. I hired, Renee Cooper. Love this woman. Had such a great time in my coaching time with Renee. And first thing she asked me for was a list of around 12 names of people that are very close to me, people that know me intimately for years and years. And then she would interview those people and come back to me with kind of, what the group had to say about me. And so I gave her the list of people. And she spent, I don't know, probably an hour with each person. Like, hey, what's Jamie really good at? Or, hey, what does Jamie got to work on? What are his shortcomings? I mean, all these tough questions. And then she gives me the data. And she doesn't tell me who said what, but it's like, here's the data. And one of the things that popped out on this is that, the people around me that know me the best believe that I value my business more than my marriage. Now, that was really hard to hear. And I'm a little bit in disbelief as I'm reading this. I'm like, no, I work hard. I mean, the reason I am an entrepreneur, the reason I run a business is I want a great family life. And I think I'm a good husband, and I think I'm a good dad, and they didn't criticize my fatherhood. Everybody knew that me being a parent was very important to me, but they just believed that my business was more important than my marriage. So I go home after this tough read. I gave this report to my wife. I'm like, hey, read all this. And believe me, there was more in that than just that. I'm just giving that example. And, she's reading it, and she closes it, and she says, everything in here is true. I'm like, what? I mean, again, talk about a burned out taillight. And talk about, rather than the cops pulling me over, I mean, gee, I'd hate to find out, a much harder way than just a report and criticism from colleagues, friends, family kind of thing. And so, I think I can say this now because I think I'm winning in this department, and I think my wife could give a strong testimonial on the changes she's seen in me over the last several years, because I've made my marriage a big priority. And again, I think I'm doing well in this department now, but I wasn't for a period of time. And so that was the medicine I needed. That's the criticism that I needed to hear. So I really believe there is such a thing as healthy criticism. So I've got 4 tips on how to seek healthy criticism, if you will. The first tip is who. Okay? Who are you getting the criticism from? Well, I've got a few points on my checklist of who I want to hear from. I mean, it's got to be somebody that I admire. It's got to be somebody that I trust. Okay? It's got to be somebody that I respect. And it's got to be somebody in a position that I'm looking to get to. Somebody who's walked down that path. Somebody who's winning in that department. So just as an example, like, again, just in business, I want to succeed in business. But if the person I'm looking at who's just winning in business, this guy's kicking butt in business, but their family life is off. They're not winning in their family life. I am deaf to hearing any criticism from that person. I don't really want to hear any criticism, because if I did go to that person for counsel, like, Jamie, here's what you got to do to be successful in business. Okay. And sure, they are succeeding in business, but the advice they give me may compromise my family, and I'm not willing to do that. So I don't go to that person. I want the person who's the total package, who's winning in the departments that are near and dear to me. So let's just start with, who are you getting the advice from? Okay, you got to identify these people. The second thing is, you need to ask for it. Okay, you need to ask for the criticism. This is the habit of proactivity here. There's a good chance that these people aren't coming to you offering you criticism. Now, you may be getting criticism from people, but chances are very high these are not the people that you want to get the criticism from. So again, you may be getting noise of criticism, but not from the people that you admire, trust, respect, and they have something that you want. Okay? So you got to, initiate, you got to set up the one-on-one, and you got to say, hey, what do you think that I can work on? You see me, you hear me, you see my actions on and off the court, you got to set that up. So you got to ask for the criticism. Third thing I have for you is, you have to come up with a plan. Okay? So Atomic Habits, I just want to read something from Atomic. If you haven't read this book, fantastic book, James Clear. So how habits are formed. Okay? I learned from Tony Robbins. I don't know if he says this anymore. He says it takes 21 days to create a habit. That's what he says. James Clear kind of blows that theory apart. All right? How habits are formed. He says, with enough practice, an activity passes through the habit line when the behavior is done without requiring thinking. One of the most common questions I hear is, how long does it take to build a new habit? But what people really should be asking is, how many does it take to form a new habit? That is, how many repetitions are required to make a habit automatic? Habits are based on frequency, not time. Okay, so I've got to put this in my calendar. Again, I got to come up with a plan. Just a quick example of this. There was somebody I was coaching years ago that I just noticed in all his interactions, he was just really dull and sort of boring and very monotone, had kind of a deeper voice, and just as you hear this person talk, you just kind of want to go to sleep. And I said, hey, as he came to me looking for criticism, looking for advice, I'm like, hey, you've got to be more enthusiastic when you engage. Your voice has to go up and down, voice fluctuation. Like, just, I just kind of want to fall asleep when I'm listening to you. So chances are maybe that's what happens with other people. So he writes in his calendar every day, be enthusiastic when I speak, be excited. Writes this down, trying to create a habit. And sure enough, I saw the needle move. I saw this person, become enthusiastic, just kind of lit up a lot more, way more charismatic, ended up becoming an owner. Years later, I'm not sure how this happened, but we're looking through this individual's calendar, and on the calendar it says, be enthusiastic when I speak, be excited. And I'm like, hey, that was years ago that we talked about that, and you've totally changed. You flipped the script. I mean, you're one of the most enthusiastic people I know when you speak. And he goes, yeah, Jamie, it's intentional. I remind myself every day to do that. He says, I could easily slip back to the guy I was because I'm just kind of naturally mellow, but I remind myself every day I'm intentional, and it's part of my plan. So you've got to put a plan together, and an effective plan requires action. So again, you got to take that criticism and you got to turn it into something constructive, and you got to do. You can't just hear. There's got to be instruction. There's got to be intent that comes with this. I didn't just decide to be a better husband. I had to what does that mean? What can I do? What actions need to be taken? And there's got to be action with that. And then the fourth thing I have for you is just go back, follow up with your wise counsel. Really good chance that when you go back and you follow up with these individuals that you're seeking criticism from, they're going to applaud you. You've got the courage, you've got the guts to take a good look in the mirror and let them know your struggles, let them know your shortcomings, let them know your victories. And chances are, again, you're going to get a pat on the back, well done, way to have the courage, way to look in the mirror, way to take action, way to be diligent about this. And it's going to end up building your confidence. So those are my tips. Again, criticism is not, again, necessarily something we're going for. But again, people would rather be ruined by praise than saved by criticism. Maybe we can check our egos, and maybe there's enough pain going on in reality that less of a stinger, the pain of criticism. Maybe I got to gravitate to hearing a little bit of criticism, look for some self-improvement, and that's how we discover our weaknesses. So I hope you enjoyed. You guys have yourselves a great day. I'll talk to you soon.